Happy
What's
St.
up,
Patrick's
boys?
Day, everybody.
Happy St. Patty's. Felipe, you celebrated.
I
How'd you
did.
celebrate?
I was able to go to Chicago for St. Patrick's Day. So definitely it was a little bit colder than it is down in DC, but definitely a lot funner. So yeah, excited to have gone. Got to see the Green River. Um, and proud to say that I remember seeing the Green River. So yeah, it was great. How about you guys?
That's awesome. I also got to celebrate. Last night I went to an event for the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick in Washington, where two people came up to me and said that they were fans of the podcast. So that made me happy. It was great. A great celebration of Irish heritage and St. Patrick. Micah, you sent a late night text last night. It seemed like you were out and about.
Yeah, I got to see some Georgetown peeps who I hadn't seen in a while. And it was funny. There was like the running joke, like all my friends are Irish Catholic white guys. So it's always great when this holiday comes. It always feels like also a holiday for me. So had a little too much fun last night and feeling the repercussions of it now.
I'm sure you're not the only one out there that's in that same boat.
I hope not. So.
Yeah, I didn't do too much. I mean, in Boston, I saw the stories from my friends in the parade. Boston's huge for St. Patty's Day, but just relaxed. Um, but
Not
yeah,
as
all
much
good.
Irish influence in San Diego as in Boston.
Yeah, I don't think so. More of a just mix of everyone.
Makes sense.
But everyone, welcome back to Year One Podcast. This is episode 21 now that we're on. Big steps. And I'm joined by the insightful minds of Micah McNeil, Felipe Segura, and Zachary Crilly on this wonderful Sunday afternoon. So today we have some interesting topics that we want to dive into. And that begins with a lot of Chinese trade talk today. So if you're interested in that, this is your pod. But Zach, you had an article that was talking about how Mexico is now leading in the U.S. imports over China.
Indeed, this is true, Gavin. I saw this article posted by a family friend who's actually a Georgetown professor, Micah, in their international business school. And he's been a China hawk for quite a while now, before it was in vogue to care about what they were up to on the other side of the world. And for the first time since 2002, the US is buying more goods, total gross imports, from Mexico than we are from China. So there's a combination of factors that lead into this. If you can just keep that chart up, Gavin. Um, One is obviously the rising tension with China. Two is the pressure that COVID put to reshore, or a term that I learned this week, which is friend shore, which is not necessarily bringing things back domestically, but bringing it onto friendly turf. Um, and also, Mexico has been booming in terms of their manufacturing. Uh, Mexico's foreign direct investment was up 40% from 2022 to 2023. Uh, so the article frames it in quite a positive way. It's pretty clear that they are are for this shift at Business Insider. They say that it will lessen transportation costs, speed up the supply chain, and reduce the climate impact, all of which will deliver cheaper products to American consumers. I was somewhat surprised to hear just how much the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, applies to the US's trading partners. Um, Mexico, China, and Canada. By the way, Canada is edging up. They are poised to overtake China as well. as a trading partner in the next couple years. Those three combined, account for a third of the U.S.'s imports. So it's interesting to see how rather quickly um, the economy has moved in response to growing concerns with China. I know that we have mixed feelings upon China and our outlooks on this, but I was really quite surprised to see that Mexico is now our leading trading partner on the global stage.
Yeah, I actually think, and this is like I think we've referenced this thinker in the pod before, but Peter Zeihan, this is actually a point that he predicted. Uh, I think I listened to him 1 year ago talking about this, where he really had a rosy outlook towards Mexico because, I mean, the distance between the U.S. and Mexico is obviously much closer than to China. But not only that, is that all these large developed economies always need developing economies where the wages are much lower to kind of fill in certain products that are labor intensive and can't be automated, right? Um, so I think Mexico is, like you said, Zach, I mean, that is a country to look out for, and it's going to be growing in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
and
know. I don't know. I hear that they have growing safety concerns. I don't know how much that plays into future prospects and political instability. But it certainly seems like they're making it 40% increase in FDI. That's significant.
I mean, for example, my dad is an engineer at an electronics, like a fiber optic company. They make connectors for like medical devices, airplanes, aircrafts, spacecraft, like things like that. And they have their warehouse down in Tijuana, Mexico. So their labor is just 40% cheaper down there. And I could just imagine how much of an advantage that is for their business. So I don't see why a lot of businesses can't just do that. But one thing I will say, and is like a question if this is sustainable, is that when it comes to reliability of manufacturing, I mean, China is the absolute best.
Disagree.
But
U.S. is the best. China's the cheapest.
China is the most efficient manufacturer in the world.
Disagree. I have no data to back this up, but I disagree. I just obviously
Well,
disagree.
all right, whatever. if you disagree or not, but what I'm saying is that is replacing Mexico with China giving us a more faulty supply chain, because in that article it even said like there's some water that's not being connected, there's being water cut off, there's being electricity outages, things like that in Mexico. Are we growing too fast in Mexico and kind of weaning off China too quickly?
I take the complete opposite approach. I almost think that I heard the concept of friendshoring, and I thought that it was like kind of a weak in between. Of the best possible solution is to have it be made domestically, but I do see this friendshoring as an improvement from supporting and enabling hostile adversary countries. To the point, I mean, China certainly has the largest manufacturing output. I don't know if they have the most efficient manufacturing processes. I would venture to guess that it depends on the company, and it's probably a case by case basis on the manufacturing processes that each company uses. But I'm even kind of more on the side of, yeah, friendshoring is great, and this is a positive development, but I would love to see it go a step further and to have it be made in the USA, truly.
Yeah, I actually though think that there's another element to Mexico, which is a lot of people are more familiar with Mexico than they are with China, right? Like
Mm.
we all know people who've been to Mexico. Like, it's not
Spring
that
break,
far away.
Cancun, baby.
Yeah, it's not that far away of a place. A lot of people speak the language. How many people do you know that speak Chinese have been to China? I know Zach, you've been to China, so that's not like fair here. But I do think that those relationships and the comfort that people have with Mexico, always having been there, vacationing, whatnot, actually will help kind of expedite some of the problems they might have, Gavin, in terms of energy, whatever the issue might be with energy or whatnot. But yeah, point taken.
Yeah, I guess the benefit that they're seeing from exporting so many goods to U.S. is that their GDP is going up like crazy, and they're going to get that economic benefit, which would be, I mean, that would be great if Mexico could be this kind of superpower next to us, and then just having that as a well-oiled machine right near us.
I mean, something that wasn't mentioned, but I'd love to see if it's a downstream effect, is how this impacts immigration and the flow of people from the southern border. If, as Mexico strengthens economically and there become more and more prospects, hey, maybe it makes sense for me to stay in country and get a manufacturing job as opposed to throwing everything away and risking it all to swim across the Rio Grande.
Yeah, and also I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Zach, because you proclaim yourself as a free market capitalist, correct?
Yes, proudly.
And what do you say about these restrictions? Do you think that's a drawback on the free market, or
What, the tariffs?
yeah, the tariffs, the weaning off of China, even though they're making the best goods at the best price?
Yeah, this is difficult, and I think that I almost want to save it for later when we talk about Felipe's topic because I think that it plays heavily into that. Look, as we've talked about in the past, I'm going to take this to a higher level. I think it's incredibly important to anchor oneself with strong, absolute beliefs. And one of mine is in the free market as the best solution, while acknowledging that there's gray area and nuance in the reality of the world. And I think that this is an example of that in action. Do I think that tariffs um, are a net positive, and we should use that as the go-to solution? No. Do I understand the argument for tariffs in this case? I do. Um, but I also think, and I was going to say this comment for later, I think like China's not the boogeyman, and it's a large and complex country, and it's not like everything that China touches is automatically bad. And I almost think that we're not there yet, but there is going to be a risk at some point of like, okay, come on, like we're beating up on China a bit too much. But I think things like this are great because I think it's kind of hard for us as Westerners to understand because we have, especially in our country, we're blessed to have such strong private property rights. In China, that concept does not exist. Even the land that the developers buy, they lease from the government for 100 years. And after 100 years, the government takes it back. The Chinese Communist Party owns every square inch of China, no questions asked. And that's just from the real estate perspective. From the manufacturing perspective, every country in China is essentially a state-owned enterprise. Even if it's a private company, they have to have, if they reach a certain level, apparatuses within the company that report their activities to the Chinese Communist Party. So every dollar that we spend as consumers, as business people, politically as policymakers supporting China is advancing the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. And that's why seeing things like this is encouraging because it's going to force them to have a real reckoning where they're not going to have this flow of continuous and seemingly infinite U.S. dollars supporting this single party system.
Yeah, well said. I do think that this next topic kind of shows why we do need to expedite this process. But I had an article that was about Amazon and Chinese sellers and how Amazon sellers are, or no, Chinese sellers on Amazon make up 50% of Amazon's revenue from third party sellers, or at least the top sellers. So I'm going to share this data here. But basically, what this is saying is that these Chinese sellers are just taking over the Amazon market and the e-commerce market in general. And obviously they can compete on price because they're the best at making goods so cheap. And really what this is saying is that China is directly impacting our economy by supplying all of these goods to consumers in the US. And we see these brands like Shein or Chinese sellers on TikTok Shop and now Temu that is creating this huge marketplace that's directly from China and it's integrating with the US. And like in that case, how do we kind of cut ties from that or wean off that? Because then it's just up to the consumers basically to get off of that. But when are they going to, since the prices are so cheap?
Yeah, I had a couple points here that stuck out to me. One is that Amazon broke or is on track to break $700 billion a year in revenue. That makes it if Amazon was a country, it would be the 23rd largest country by GDP, one notch below Taiwan and one notch above Belgium. So just in terms of the scale of that as an institution, and then that plays into the point of okay, as you said, Gavin, Chinese sellers now make up half of the top sellers, and those sellers drive around half of the sales. So it's about a quarter of the market that they have now. Mm-hmm. And really, what that article was saying, and what I walked away from it hearing, is that the shift isn't that all of a sudden products are coming from China. These products have been coming from China. What the shift is that these manufacturers are waking up, and instead of selling to American brands or American retailers, instead of selling to middlemen who will then slap their label on it and sell it on Amazon, or selling it to a Walmart or some sort of retailer, they're just now going direct to the consumer. So that's certainly an evolution. I think that has much greater implications for the Amazon marketplace and the third-party American sellers, especially ones that get their goods from China, than it does for the economy at large. But it's certainly, I mean, that, as you saw, that chart was up and to the right. So it seems like more and more of these Chinese manufacturers are looking at their customers who are American brands, and they're saying, hey, you're getting my product for $1 and selling it for 10. Why don't I just sell it for 8 and undercut you and get some of that margin? Your margin is my opportunity.
Agreed. And I do think that, I mean, it's a bad day to be a drop shipper, that's for sure. This basically says death to drop shipping, because what that was is literally just taking a product from Alibaba and selling it in the US marketplace. But now the Chinese sellers are just doing that. But I do still think that the power of the brand will shine through, and that US consumers are going to kind of vote with their dollars still. And I think that direction is still going in the made in America, like quality branding, whatever value prop they decide to do. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Like, do you think that people are going to still go for the brands, or just go for the cheapest option, making Chinese sellers ultimately win in the long run?
Felipe, what do you think? I know you're toying around with building a brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is though part of the actual issue in China itself, right? The very fact that these brands are now creating their own massive tech companies and are able to hire or create organizations that can then sell directly in the US as opposed to having someone from the US use them as like a third party manufacturer and bring it over, uh, is demonstrating that China is developing as a nation, right? You have a lot of people now that have the ability, there's the market in China to create these essentially this infrastructure. So in many ways, this is like kind of like a dangerous moment right now, but that is like an issue in general is China is losing its ability to be a manufacturer in general. And I think that this ties into what we're talking about. Other countries with people who have much lower standards of living, those are where those third party manufacturers are going to go. So it really is a question of whether China is going to be able to create brands that are similar to those of the US, similar to what Gavin was highlighting. And I think that that's, if you actually look at what Xi Jinping, I think his China 20 or his latest 10-year plan for China was we want to go to high end manufacturing. I think they don't do that because they just like want to become the next Louis Vuitton of the world as if like that's an end in itself. I think they see the writing on the wall that their ability to be low end manufacturers like the US was at one point and whatnot is coming to an end. And the only other way of sustaining growth as a manufacturing country is to do high end, like Germany and like other countries or Taiwan has been able to do, right?
That's a great point. I agree with you that it seems like an evolution from the Chinese perspective. Gavin, I would say that death to drop shippers might be a bit far. I think that it's just becoming less and less sustainable of a business model, right? Because you might get lucky with a product and your brand might take off for a couple months, but now you got to be worried about your manufacturer coming after you and just reproducing the same thing. Uh, so that is certainly interesting. And Felipe, when you say that, I almost am curious. It seems like China has a window, right, where they're trying to translate into a high-end manufacturing, and ultimately they want to be a service-based economy, right? But they also have a massive population that they have one party that's responsible for, and the popularity of the party is largely dependent on economic gains. So it will be really interesting to see if their kind of exit velocity from this low end manufacturer into a high end manufacturer slash service economy will be strong enough to bring them out of the orbit of the cash flow gusher that has been low end manufacturing for them, or whether they're going to get sucked back into that orbit and kind of fall into the middle income trap.
Yeah, that is the big question surrounding China, and it's not easy to become the like next superpower or whatnot. And yeah, all eyes are on China. The pressure's on them. Balls in their court, right?
I wonder if Ray Dalio is shaking in his boots. The New World Order. I don't know. Without the U.S. Help to do that, like what would that look like if the U.S. basically just said, "Hey, we're done with China. Like we're getting TikTok out, which we'll talk about later. We're getting Shein out, Temu by." That would be a very interesting world.
But that might be a reality, like
You
actual
guys,
very.
you guys actually think that's possible?
I think so.
You don't
Donald
think we
Trump.
rely on China?
No,
Like,
I mean, one of the presidential nominees that like has a pretty good shot of winning is essentially saying like we're going to cut ties completely with China. So I think that there's a little bit of a will on both sides to do it.
You seem to disagree, Micah.
we literally need China just as much as China needs us. The two things coexist. You can't just throw away something. You can't throw away a country that holds 20% of the entire trade in the entire world and be like, oh, we don't need them anymore.
I mean, you can. It just won't be good for both sides. I mean, that happened literally in the era of the Great Depression, right? All the countries right before, in between World War One, World War Two, went super protectionist, and it was one of the worst economic situations in the world. So, point taken. It's like terrible to do it, but it definitely can be done.
I mean, that's like modern pre-globalization though. So it's like a whole different use case. Like I just don't see how you have a world that's so entwined with international globalized trade and you just say, all right, the two biggest trade partners aren't going to trade anymore. And let's see like what the ramifications from that would be. Um, I just don't think that would be good for either side.
I
And
agree that like a lot of things would just go to shit, but I think that would happen for maybe 10 years and then things would just figure itself out. Like Mexico would rise, Canada would rise, all of these other places would take its place. And ultimately, I mean, it would suck, but I think it could work out in the long run.
Well, that's a whole bet, right? That's the entire bet. That's where, quote unquote, that's where the trend is going towards a more like deglobalized, let's sort of trade with maybe that NAFTA route, Canada and Mexico, India, and then maybe Western Europe. But I don't know. I think from a macro sense, I don't actually think that's going to happen. Um, I think what's going to happen is just you're going to have two coexisting hegemonic powers, that being us and obviously China. So I think it's going to be very important how that foreign relationship continues to develop. Trump, you mentioned Trump. He also, in that same speech that you're talking about, was like, "Xi is my friend, and if they don't fix this, we're going to cut off ties." But he was like, he prefaced it with, "We're friends, and we obviously want to keep that relationship going." Um, i.e., the talk you're talking about from his last rally. So we'll see where that goes. I think it's very important that we keep our relationship diplomatic, foreign manufacturing, trade policy very well with China. I think they're going to be very important for us going forward.
I agree with you on that sense that I the concept of just saying, okay, let's pretend like China doesn't exist anymore. Let's lock them in a closet and throw away the key like a problem child is not the right reaction. I mean, China isn't. It's a country of 1 point whatever billion people. It's a massive player, and it's not all evil. It's not like all bad. There's a lot of great parts of China and a lot of great parts of China that can benefit us in the U.S. and can benefit the world at large. With that being said, I don't think that it's advantageous for us. I think that we are very clearly the world leader, and I think that we have, as the U.S. has fueled China's rise through manufacturing dollars, through giving them the most favored status at the World Trade Organization, through these different diplomatic, economic positions that the U.S. has taken throughout the past couple decades since China reopened under Nixon. I think that it's smart of us to be reconsidering that because the ideology from people here in Washington was if you continue to fuel their economy, eventually they will westernize and they will become more like us. That was the big concept, and kind of the big mistake that the Western thought leaders made was that if you continue to fuel China's rise and make them more and more capitalistic, then they will eventually assimilate more and more to the Western world order. And as you pointed out, Micah, they're very much trying to build a parallel world order. And I think that it's advantageous for us as a nation, and obviously I'm biased, but I also think the world at large to not fuel that rise.
Yeah, well, with our last topic here, I mean, the ban of TikTok, that would set a pretty crazy precedent for our relationship with China. And I wonder how that would impact the relationship going forward?
Yeah, I could take this one. I think there's a lot of different influences coming behind that decision. I think on the one hand, there is what we've been talking about, which is at least this initial stage of decoupling the major areas or parts of trade with China, right? And TikTok being one of them. Paranoia with the CCP having so much data of American consumers, right? But the second area that I think is really interesting is it's because I think a lot of lawmakers really don't like the idea of children and all of the youth being on TikTok and watching it for hours on end. And I think that that other vein of what's happening, and you have that, or you see examples of that with Josh Hawley interviewing Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know if you guys saw that hearing where he like made him stand up and turn around to the parents of children who tragically committed suicide to apologize. But that is
Just
definitely
imagine his PR team watching that and just being like, "No,
yeah.
no."
I mean, there's so much to dissect in that, but aside from that fact, like there is a vein of people who are like, no, no, we need to ban it. I don't care because of China. It's just like let's get rid of it because it's terrible for society. And I think that argument or that side of the argument is not going to win. I think that like you can't just prevent like if it's not TikTok, some other form of social media or something is going to come up in its place. And we already have Meta. Like Meta Instagram Reels is essentially a spin-off of TikTok that
YouTube Shorts.
yeah, and YouTube Shorts. So they might not be as good or might be just as good. It doesn't matter. But I think that that is it on the topic of decoupling with China, right? China now is selling more electric vehicles in the US with BYD than Tesla, right? But then you have on the social media front, there's TikTok, but then Meta is way bigger than TikTok and ByteDance. And so we're trying to prevent the growth of a massive hegemonic Chinese tech company, right? So it is a real big shakeup. I think whoever TikTok gets sold to, or if they have to sell the US side of the company, it's not going to be as good or be able to compete with Meta. Like, I think that infrastructure for competition is going to kind of go away. But yeah, I think this is like a crazy, interesting story, right?
Yeah, I think you bringing up the social aspect is probably the thing that's going to get the most the most microphone time. But what it really is, and I think you probably align with this, but I Palmer Luckey basically came out and was just like, we can't sell this to China, so like, why can they sell it to us? And I think from a legislative i.e. or slash political risk standpoint, that's where it changes, where eventually it's going to have to be sold to an American entity. And that makes sense, right? Like, that actually makes sense. Like, you're selling this product, you control the algorithm, it's sanctioned or, obviously built in China, and you obviously have agency over what's on that platform. Whereas we can't do the same thing to you in China. So, like, that when you look at it, I guess from, I don't know if you want to call it first principle or not, but if you look at it from that standpoint, it makes no sense that that this isn't owned or operated by an American entity. And I actually do align with that. And I think that's what's going to end up happening.
I take the opposite perspective on this one. I disagree with the concept of banning China or banning TikTok or China in general, like we were just talking about. I think that it's an oversimplistic solution to a complex problem. Um, I agree with you, Felipe, that and Micah, that likely it is the fact that these senators go home and if they have children, their children are most probably on TikTok that is moving the needle here, and that's what people, everyday Americans, can relate to because people, young people especially, spend a massive amount of time on that platform. From the national security perspective, they're probably pretty concerned because China's now doing things that our national security agencies have been doing for a long time, which is collecting massive amounts of data on a massive amount of the US population. Um, And I strongly believe that that's something that the intelligence agencies wish to have a complete monopoly on, is that information. But fundamentally, as Gavin mentioned earlier, we our core beliefs, at least from my perspective, are radical individualism and radical free marketism, and we must stand by those, even if there's a bully on the playground that's not letting us sell our goods there. I don't think that we should turn around and say that we're just going to do tit for tat. Um, and I'm reminded of past examples where this beautiful concept of radical free marketism, when it comes to ideas, when it comes to products, when it comes to anything else, when that's been restricted in the past, I think that that's a big mistake. And I think that we have an opportunity in front of us to stand by that principle of radical free marketism and reject this banning. There's a really interesting debate between Rand Paul and Ted Cruz on the Senate floor when this was brought up previously. And as hard as it is as a pill to swallow, I would be all for giving government grants to a U.S. alternative app that might not be as good in the beginning to start to compete with TikTok. But I reject the idea of going against our free market principles because this is obviously a problem, but that is not the right solution.
So does nothing trump free market? Like we can't sell it. Like we can't sell this to them. Go ahead.
Does this change your mind at all? Like, look at the drops in reading and math scores for I don't know what grade this is.
The problem is clear to me,
For
but that's
age
not
9.
all China's fault. I'm sure China's applauding that because it makes a weaker enemy, but that's not China's fault that the reading and the math scores have dropped that significantly.
Zach's right about that. I mean, that's just we could have a whole another episode dedicated to that. I think that was more on what you just shared is more it's correlated to our conversation we had about like people in like the younger generation wanting to be podcasters and influencers and the whole nine. That's related with that, I think.
Hey, don't attack podcasters, Micah.
Being a podcaster is good. I'm saying the influencers or whatever. But I just think like just from a general meeting, like a median of exchange, we can't do this to them, but they can do it to us. That to me, there's some principle to there that's faulty. Yeah. Whereas it's like if we were able to also do this in China, it'd be like okay, but they wouldn't allow us to do it. But I do agree with you from. Go ahead.
Yeah, but we're not communist.
And that's what is hard because it's like playground rules, right? And if a kid slaps you in the face, you want to slap that kid back. But this is almost like the equivalent of turning the other cheek, right? Where it's like they say we're not going to let you in our marketplace, and I don't think that the right answer is for us to say me neither, because I know in speaking with Chinese friends, they know that at least the ones that are educated and have traveled or have access to the outside world, they know that they are not getting what people in other countries get. And in my opinion, that will eventually lead to the downfall of the Chinese regime as it currently stands. But I don't think that the solution is for us to take their same tactics and apply it right back to them, because then we're just sinking to their level instead of maintaining our core values and keeping it at that high value driven level.
Oh, I see. And I can't come up with a way to try to disagree, because that kind of does make sense. You're looking at it more from a solution mindset, but I just don't know if there is a breaking point like for that. But you'd be right that it would start a bad precedent going forward, and that's what we should try to avoid.
And maybe there's creative solutions like within I mean, what a great interesting problem. Like, what if as the US is giving grants to new companies to or existing companies to make TikTok alternatives, what if they slow down the internet rates of TikTok so kids can't consume it as fast? What if they can like make it kind of a worse product indirectly to kind of force the hand of consumers in a way to other people? Of course, that's not free market, so I wouldn't advocate for it. But I think that it's just way too simplistic to be like ban it. Like that just doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense, but I don't think it's the right answer.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there must be some kind of breaking point to capitalism. I mean, I know we've had conversations before of like, okay, you're either at one side of the spectrum or the other. It's like, okay, are you communist China and you take every cent from every person in your country, or are you free market where everybody can make their decisions no matter what? And I definitely lean on the side of everybody should be able to make their decisions. But it's like, all right, if our kids are literally numbing their minds, depression's up, anxiety's up, all of this shit is happening to like the younger generations, at what point do you step in and you do guide them in at least a better direction? Like you were saying, maybe not ban it, but there's a certain point I do think in terms of what the United States is responsible for.
At first, I was going to say, okay, comrade, what's the breaking point of capitalism? And then what? We have socialist paradise after that?
No.
But I do agree with you fundamentally. I mean, if we're looking at trends here, depression is up, obesity is up, education is down, contentment is down. This isn't a winning solution, and nor a society whose trends I want to live in or be a part of. I think that this would be a great conversation for another week of what are the limits and what has the U.S. done that has led to this, and what can we do moving forward from the policy perspective, but also as individuals, as young, ambitious people that are at the beginning of their career that want to make positive changes. Because, I mean, it's sad to look at that. It's sad to just walk around and see people unhealthy and visibly unhappy. I certainly want to live in a society that's better than that.
Yeah, and I just watched a documentary on Netflix with the Sackler family, and that was all about the drug trade. And
That shit is crazy.
yeah, like to your points of just letting everything be, like look what somebody did when you let him do that, and look what he was able to take advantage of to enable that to happen. Just fill the drug supply with heroin and opioids and all of this shit. And when all these people had those choices, they made the wrong ones. But that can be next episode. And honestly, that's a very interesting topic.
One last point before we close, and I did want to say this. I think that it's easy to have like one fault guy or a fall man or a boogeyman for any situation. China isn't responsible for all of our problems. The Sackler family isn't responsible for all of our problems. You know, whatever bad food company or big pharma company that's causing problems isn't everything. But I would love for us, for bright minds, to put our heads together and try to figure out what has been the cause of this, where did we go off track, and how can we get back and be a part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. My money would be on the individual.
Amen.
So that is a wrap to this podcast, episode 21. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your weekend and the week ahead.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Good fellas. Happy St. Patrick's Day.